Harry S. Truman, The American Hegemony. Do ends justify the means? While this question may be subject to contention, it seems that Harry Truman believed in the affirmative. Truman is many things. He was a soldier, a district judge, a senator, and a president, and his reputation was both well regarded on one hand and criticized on the other. Yet when we talk about Harry Truman, the images people often associate are two: the dropping of the atomic bomb and the fight for democracy by combating communism. What was Truman's role in such events, and how did it shape his legacy? Harry S. Truman was born in Lamar, Missouri, USA on May 8, 1884. His parents were John Truman, a livestock trader, and Martha Young Truman. One may assume that the S in his name stood for a specific middle name, but Truman's parents only put it in honor of Anderson Ship Truman and Solomon Young, his grandfathers. As a young kid, Truman figured he could get what he wanted by getting along with people, studying them, getting to know their thoughts, and figuring out what they wanted, using this knowledge to please them. Therefore, he took a liking to all his teachers from school, and the teachers would often reciprocate this. Young Truman had already shown aspects of his smarts, foreshadowing his eventual career in politics. He dreamed of being a general, having loved reading volumes of books about great men and famous women. His favorite volume was Soldiers and Sailors, wherein he particularly loved the story about One-Eyed Hannibal, whom he shared a somehow similar experience with, at least in the eyesight handicap. Young Truman and his family were watching the July 4th fireworks when his family member noticed that he was responding more to the sounds rather than the spectacle. Turns out he was blind as a mole, with an eyesight so poor that his lenses were already thick for a kid. This handicap initially hindered his dream of becoming a general, for his bad eyesight prevented his admittance to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. Having no means to afford college, Truman worked as a bank clerk along with other jobs after graduating high school in 1901. When the U.S. entered World War I in 1917, Truman finally had his chance of achieving his dream. He enlisted in as a National Guard and was sent to France. Eventually, he was promoted to captain of his unit. Upon his return in 1919 after the war, he started to build a family with Elizabeth Wallace, his childhood classmate turned wife. He tried to enter the world of business and open a clothing store with a friend, but perhaps luck was not with him, for it eventually closed in 1922 because of the poor economy. Perhaps Truman was not made for business or simple civilian life, for his destiny lies in public service. In 1922, he was elected as a district judge in Jackson County, Missouri. There, he handled the finances and public works projects. In just 4 years, he became the presiding judge and earned a good reputation as an efficient man with integrity. He was elected to the U.S. Senate in 1934 and was a supporter of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal programs. Among his legislative contributions were the Civil Aeronautics Act of 1938 and the Transportation Act of 1940. He also contributed to saving the nation's millions of dollars from wasteful and mismanaged spending in the military by heading the Senate Special Committee to investigate the National Defense Program. When Franklin Roosevelt ran for his fourth term as president, Truman replaced Henry Wallace as Roosevelt's vice presidential candidate running mate. However, only 3 months after being sworn in as president, Roosevelt suddenly died because of a cerebral hemorrhage on April 12, 1945. Suddenly, Truman felt like he was Atlas, the Titan god, carrying the whole world in his arms when he took over the presidency. He succeeded Roosevelt as the 33rd American president. Although the Second World War was already at its end when he started his first administration, he was met with threats of the Japanese invasion, for albeit Nazi Germany already surrendered, Japan still refused to. By then, the famous U.S. atomic bomb was already constructed, and Truman was led into a controversial decision. To force the Japanese to surrender, he approved the dropping of atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing tens of thousands of people and completely wiping out the two cities. Although the number of casualties from the direct blasts were much less, the numbers increased because of those who suffered the long-term after effects of radiation exposure. This was branded as a massive humanitarian issue, and it led to the creation of legal instruments aimed at preventing and regulating the use of nuclear weapons. His first administration was also marked by the fight against the communist threat, which deteriorated the Soviet-US relations which were supposedly built during the alliance in the World War. Truman had to lead the country during the Cold War with the Soviet Union, wherein he aided several countries such as Greece and Turkey to protect them from communist aggression. His Marshall Plan sought to aid the war-torn countries around Europe by giving millions of dollars to stimulate economic recovery. This plan was in line with his agenda to combat the communist threat, for Truman believed that economically depressed regions are more vulnerable to communist agendas. In 1949, he swore for his second term as president. Yet again, it was marked by his fight against communism. In its pursuit, he, along with the leaders of Canada, France, the UK, and 8 other countries, created a military alliance called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, in 1949, aimed at securing the member states' freedom and security, upholding democratic values. Truman's administration, albeit driven by the general desire to uphold the interests of his country and values of freedom and democracy, have had questionable means of attaining it. The bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was the epitome of Western hypocrisy in upholding democratic and liberal values of human rights. It was a human right to stop the Japanese hostilities over the territories they conquered, as well as to protect the American people from its threat. However, the death of thousands of innocent Japanese civilians was certainly a violation that will echo throughout history. On another note, his administration also marked the start of enmity between the Communist East and the Democratic West, which stretches until the present day. In the years that followed, the United States, in the name of containing communism and upholding democracy, aided in the armed conflicts in several countries by supplying arms. While some may see this as justified, some say it is a mere display of Western hegemony over weaker countries from the periphery. Although overall, Harry Truman was well regarded as one of the USA's best presidents because of upholding human rights by combating communism, the above-mentioned events and their repercussions will also forever mark his legacy, and perhaps even the USA's political standing in the global arena as a hegemon. Thank you for listening. In case you didn't know, hitting the like button helps the channel quite a bit. Don't forget to subscribe so that you can join me again next time as we look into the life of other historical figures that shaped the world as we know it.